This story I'm about to tell you, it's about my buddy, Bryan. You'd look at Bryan now, driving his slightly too nice truck, living in that house that actually has a yard. You'd think that guy won the lottery. But nope, he just got really smart about real estate. It's funny how these big life changes start with something totally mundane. So, it was about 10 years ago, Bryan was working as a manager at one of those big box hardware stores. You know, the type fluorescent lights, the smell of sawdust and paint thinner, and asking customers for the 100th time where the drywall screws are. He was making decent money, I guess enough to pay the bills and maybe buy a pizza on Friday. But every paycheck, it felt like he was just running on a treadmill that went nowhere fast. He'd come home after a 12-hour shift, totally drained, and try to unwind. One evening, he was scrolling through his phone, just doom scrolling, looking at fancy vacation photos, and then he landed on this article. It was one of those clickbait headlines, something like, "Stop working for your money, let your money work for you." Ugh, right? But something stuck. It was about owning property. Bryan didn't know squat about real estate. His only connection was renting his tiny, overpriced apartment downtown. He'd pay his rent on the 1st, and by the 15th, the money was gone and he was eating ramen again. It felt like he was funding someone else's nice life. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the rent. He thought, what if I was the guy collecting that rent? What if my money was paying someone else's mortgage? It was a light bulb moment, but it was immediately followed by a huge wave of panic. He looked at his savings account. It had maybe $3,000 in it. That wasn't enough to buy a shed, let alone a house. He started reading everything he could find. Forget the fancy books. He was reading forum posts at 2 a.m., looking up mortgage terms until his eyes burned. He learned the basic idea. People pay you money every month to live in something you own. That's called cash flow. Method number 1. It sounded almost too simple, but the barrier was the down payment. He got serious. He looked at his budget with the ruthless focus of a tax auditor. He cut everything. No more Friday pizza. He sold his slightly souped-up gaming PC that was painful. Man, that thing was his pride and joy, and sold his old couch. He started bringing lunch every single day. It wasn't fun. It was just grim discipline. He managed to save up about $15,000 in 18 months. It felt like digging a tunnel with a spoon, but he did it. Finally, Bryan had enough money for a down payment on what they call a starter property. He didn't buy a pristine condo downtown. No way. He looked way out in the suburbs, in an older neighborhood where houses were cheaper but still had good bones. He found a duplex. A duplex! That was smart because it meant 2 separate living spaces. He found one that was a wreck on the outside but structurally sound. The owner was desperate to sell because they were moving out of state fast, they negotiated hard, and Bryan snagged it for way under asking price. This is where the second method came in, forced appreciation through sweat equity. He used almost every penny of his savings, plus a small loan from his sister, which he promised he'd pay back with interest, because he's not a vulture, just ambitious, and he started fixing it up himself on weekends. He learned how to patch drywall from YouTube videos. He painted until his arms felt like noodles. He fixed the leaky faucet in Unit A himself, watching 3 different instructional videos before daring to touch the pipes. It was exhausting. He'd work his full shift at the hardware store, grab a quick burger, and then spend 8 hours hammering, sanding, or cleaning up trash in the yard. His weekends disappeared. He felt tired all the time, but underneath the fatigue, there was this buzzing excitement. He was building something that was actually his. Once Unit A was clean, safe, and looked decent, he rented it out. The rent from Unit A covered his entire mortgage payment for the whole duplex. That was a massive weight off his shoulders. He lived in Unit B. Now here's the magic of the third method kicking in, leverage. He put down maybe $20,000, but he controlled a $200,000 asset. The bank held most of the risk, but Bryan held the keys. The tenant in Unit A was paying down his mortgage for him every single month. He was living for free, effectively. He lived in Unit B for 2 years. He kept that place spotless, but he didn't spend money on fancy furniture or expensive trips. He was saving every dime from his hardware store job, letting the tenant pay down the principal on the loan. He wasn't rich yet, but he wasn't running on that treadmill anymore. He was walking forward. 2 years later, the loan balance was down significantly, and the neighborhood started getting popular. Suddenly, that $200,000 duplex was worth maybe $270,000. The tenant in Unit A was a good renter, always on time. Bryan was ready for move number 2, which brought in the fourth and most exciting method, refinancing and recycling capital. He called a local mortgage broker, not the big bank guy, but a small local one who understood investment properties. He explained the situation. I have a duplex. The tenants pay the mortgage. I have equity now because the property value went up and I paid down the loan. The bank looked at the numbers. Because the property was now generating reliable income, they agreed to give him a new, bigger loan based on the new, higher value of the property. They let him pull out some of that built-up equity, about $50,000 in cash tax-free, because it was a loan against his asset, not income. Bryan's heart was pounding when he signed those papers. 50 grand in his pocket. He didn't feel guilty about taking the money. He felt like he'd earned it by managing the asset well. He used that $50,000 plus another year of savings and bought another duplex, this time using a professional property manager for the new place so he didn't have to spend every single weekend covered in paint fumes. He kept living in Unit B of the first duplex, letting the tenants there continue to pay off that first mortgage. He was now collecting rent on 4 doors. This is where it got fun. He wasn't just living for free anymore, he was making a real profit every month. After the mortgages, taxes, and insurance, he was clearing about $1,200 a month from those 2 properties. That was more than his old hardware store salary, and he hadn't even quit his job yet. He kept repeating the process. Every couple of years, he'd check the equity, refinance the older properties to pull cash out, and use that cash to buy the next deal. Sometimes the next deal wasn't a duplex. Sometimes it was a single-family house he rented out to a family, or maybe a small strip mall unit he leased to a dry cleaner. The stress never completely went away. There was that time the furnace blew in the middle of a snowstorm, and he had to front $4,000 to fix it immediately. But now, instead of panicking and putting it on a high-interest credit card, he just pulled the money from the reserves he kept specifically for emergencies on his rental units. The system was built to handle the bad stuff. Bryan eventually quit the hardware store job. He didn't retire at 35, but he left the fluorescent lights behind for good. Now he manages his portfolio, a dozen doors spread across 3 neighborhoods. He's not a billionaire, but he's wealthy. He has control over his time, and his monthly income from rents is triple what he used to make managing those aisles of lumber. He showed me his spreadsheet once. It wasn't just about collecting rent. It was about how the value of his properties kept ticking up every year, and how the tenants kept paying down his debt. He was getting rich in 3 different ways at the same time: cash flow every month, the property value going up, and the debt shrinking. It was a perfect financial storm, all built on bricks and mortar, not stock tips. It took discipline, ignoring the immediate gratification of a new TV or a fancy vacation, and learning to be comfortable with being slightly uncomfortable while fixing things himself early on. But looking at him now, relaxed, taking his kids fishing every Tuesday afternoon because his schedule belongs to him, yeah, that was worth every missed pizza night. Bryan got wealthy by using real estate to create multiple income streams, cash flow from rent, debt paydown by tenants, and rising property values, and then smartly recycling that built-up equity to buy more properties.